Welcome to this month's episode of Plenty in 20. As always, we'll keep it short, sharp, and punchy so you get plenty of value in the smallest amount of time. Today's topic is all about managing conflict in your team. It's something that we know is uncomfortable for many managers, but the reality is when you put a group of people together, a group of intelligent people together, there is no prospect of them not having conflict. People must have different values, different perspectives, different ideas. In fact, if you're seeing no conflict, it's a bad sign. It means that people aren't confident, they're not comfortable, they don't trust the environment enough to speak about those differences, and a lot of good ideas are getting lost, and a lot of conflict is being suppressed, which will create tension and other undercurrents. So we're far better off. There's so many upsides to having conflict if we learn to manage it well, and there's so many downsides to suppressing conflict. And as I said, there is no prospect that conflict doesn't exist in your team. It's just a matter of whether it's expressed or not. Now, before we get into the content here, a little bit of background for those who might be seeing their first Plenty in 20. My name's Simon Tyson. I've been running this organisation for over 30 years and have had for over 30 years senior executive roles at CEO, COO and board director level in several organisations, and have spent those 30 years working with culture, leadership and teams. So pretty much any conflict that you are experiencing or trying to deal with as a manager, I've seen something equivalent to it. I may not have seen the precise issue, but I can guarantee I've dealt with very similar stuff. So we're going to start with your attitude towards conflict. How do you feel about it? And what do you perceive to be conflict? See, I believe that our capacity to deal with conflict is a blend of our skill. So do we have good strategies? Can we communicate well in conflict? Do we know how to guide ourselves and other people to resolution? But none of that really counts unless we take care of the second part of that blend, which is our attitude. I call this our conflict resilience. So if you feel that even a minor issue, for example, two people in a meeting, one says, I think we should do this, someone else says, oh, actually, I've got a different idea. If you feel that that's conflict, then you've got potentially low conflict resilience. If you're really comfortable for people to have a very robust discussion about different ideas and throw it around and challenge each other and come to a positive outcome as a team, then you've got higher conflict resilience. If we have low conflict resilience, we tend to make nice. We tend to smooth things over at the first sign of conflict. And of course, that's not healthy. What we're effectively doing is suppressing conflict, and we're sending that message to people that conflict is not okay in our team. So work on your conflict resilience, accept that it's normal, and be prepared to sit with uncomfortable. Be prepared to encourage people to challenge each other's ideas and thinkings and perspectives. Now, one thing that a lot of leaders say to us is they're adults. Why should I get involved? Why do I need to get in there and fix this for them? Well, the first answer is you don't. I don't want you to fix this for them. But while they're adults, they still may lack the skill, the willingness, or the confidence to sort it out. And it's really useful for you as a manager to think about which of those three things is lacking. Is it they're just not prepared to because they're stubborn? Is it because they know how to and they'd like to, but they're intimidated, they don't have the confidence? Or is it they don't have the communication, the negotiation, the listening, etc. skills that they need? Obviously, once you know which they're lacking, it helps you decide what to work on. Now, as a leader, there are many options, and we're going to walk through them more or less as a sequence. It doesn't always work perfectly as a sequence, but we will walk through them in the fairly typical sequence. It's an escalating sequence. There's one option that's not available, and that's to bury your head and hope it goes away. To say, well, I'm just going to get on with work, everyone else get on with work, they can sort their stuff out. That's not an option. Strangely enough, the first of the four options sounds a bit like it, but there is a really important difference that we'll talk about as we deep dive. So the four options are observe, coach, facilitate, and escalate. And as I said before, think of those more or less as an escalation process. It doesn't mean you jump in at one all the time. There may be reasons for you to jump in at 2, 3, or even 4, and I'll explain those as we go. But think of them as you're unlikely to facilitate and then go back to coach, or to escalate and then go back to observe. So once you sort of hit one point, it is harder to go back to the other, or to the preceding ones. So let's walk through those. So observe sounds a little bit like just ignoring it and hoping it goes away. The difference here is that you're proactively monitoring. You're watching what's happening. You're aware that there's an issue here, that two people, maybe more, are not agreeing on something. There's some tension there, and you're making sure of two things: that they don't suppress it, because that will lead to undercurrents, as we said before, but they also don't end up in an unhealthy place as they sort it out. It's so positive to give them a chance to sort it out. And you're right, they are adults, and we should have the expectation that they at least try to do that. So we're not intervening, but we are proactively monitoring. When they manage to resolve the issue itself, it gives them so much confidence that, gee, I dealt with a difficult situation there. I'm not comfortable with conflict, but I actually managed to work through it, and we got to a healthy outcome. In the process, they will learn new skills, and those skills will come in handy next time they're in conflict, which is inevitable. And it also gives them ownership over the outcome. It hasn't been imposed on them. It hasn't been entrenched, or the issue hasn't been entrenched by escalating. So they now own the point they've come to, and they may not even know that you were particularly aware of this because you had that watching brief. This approach leans into the message that conflict's not just okay, it's good. There are and this is not the video we're going to talk about these in, but there are so many upsides to conflict that we lose if we don't embrace it. So, and as a really quick snapshot, different ideas, breaking out of complacency, accountability, so many different things are positive upsides of conflict as long as it's handled well. The two issues with conflict are suppressing it or allowing it to flare into something unhealthy. So, step one. We know step one is done when conflict becomes entrenched, when we're stuck, when people clearly can't resolve this themselves, and it's reached the point of being unhealthy, where it's spilling over and impacting others in the team unacceptably. So other team members are having their own morale, their own ability to perform at a high level impacted. Or when you can see that because, for whatever reason, some sort of power differential, which could be the relative roles of people, it could be simply the personalities of the people, but you can see that the resolution will be inequitable. It could be the conflict styles of people. And so one person may be just conceding because they're so uncomfortable with the conflict, and that will lead to a resolution that is neither sustainable nor equitable. So that's time for you to step in. But we're stepping in lightly. We're not stepping in and escalating this to some really formal thing. What we're doing is moving to step two. And step two is about coaching them. Now, as a leader, being a coach is non-negotiable. You cannot be a leader unless you're willing and able to coach people. And we're not talking about being a professional coach. There is another Plenty in 20 on this topic. Basically, coaching is being able to sit with people and guide them, generally by using really good open questions, to find some solutions for themselves. So we're still letting them resolve this themselves, but they're doing it with our guidance. So what you're going to do in a coaching phase is not get people together. You're going to individually talk to people. And you may talk to one party, you may talk to both parties, assuming there's two. If there's more, you might talk to all of the parties individually. You may not feel that each of the parties needs this discussion, so there may be someone that you can see is less willing, and perhaps you coach them. You may see someone who's less able or less confident, and you coach them. Generally speaking, I coach all parties. I might go into greater depth with one or two if I feel that they're going to struggle more. So as part of the coaching, what I'm doing is I'm asking, well, what are their concerns? And what are their perspectives? I'm hearing that. But I'm also trying to get them, what we almost certainly know at this point is they haven't understood each other's perspectives. They're so focused on what they need, what they're worried about, that they keep talking about that and keep thinking about that and not being open to what the other person's perspective is. So as a coach, I'm going to open them up to that. So what might the other person be worried about here? What's the outcome they might want? It's probably the first time they've really thought about that. I'm also going to coach them on how they're planning to communicate. So what's your approach going to be? How are you going to make sure that you have this conversation without escalating the conflict? And I might give them some feedback on that. If you heard someone say that to you, how might that land for you? How could you do that in a way that felt less confronting for the other person? And I'm also going to agree, in addition to the strategy, on the time. So when are you going to deal with this? Because I'd like to follow up with you afterwards. Now, before we move on, I'm going to show you some resources. These are by and large free. So we have a podcast called The Culture Nerds, which talks a lot about leadership and workplace culture and teams. You'll get some excellent tips there about leadership in general. You can subscribe to that on our website, which will link you to most of the podcast platforms, or just go to your favorite podcast platform. On our website, there's also a blog, and the blog has a number of topics around those same things, around culture, leadership, and teams. And we have several free resources, again, available on our website as downloadable resources, and some of these relate specifically to teams and high-performance teams, which is very central to how we deal with conflict. And one final one, and this is the only paid one, is our Authentic Leadership Program, an ongoing 6-month program. And by using that discount code there, you can save $500 off the 6-month registration. Check it out. It does tell you all the details at that link. So let's move on to step 3, which is facilitate. And critically, now I'm getting the people together, but they're still solving this themselves. I'm not going to solve it for them. It is their problem, as we'll touch on in a slide in a moment. So I'm simply providing the framework. So they're discussing the issue with my support. And I might coach them, but now I'm coaching them in a group environment as they go through it. If I see something occurring that isn't going to be helpful to resolution, I might stop them. But I'm not going to avoid uncomfortable. So if I see it becoming uncomfortable, I'm going to let them sit with that, even if it's making me uncomfortable to do that. So it's still their problem. And I think it's sometimes good to explicitly say this, because people will look at you, perhaps during coaching, perhaps during facilitation, and ask you, well, what do you want me to do about this? And I think the appropriate answer to that is, I want you to solve this because this is not okay in our workplace, and I'll support you to solve it, but it's your responsibility to do that. The only responsibility you have here is to provide the framework and to keep it safe. So if you can see someone is not coping, if someone's behaving aggressively, etc., then you might jump in. You could also set some ground rules up front. That can be part of your facilitation process. Now, don't be intimidated by the word facilitate any more than you were by the word coach. This is simply providing a structure, a framework in which people can have a conversation and helping them maybe have that conversation in a way that they wouldn't if you weren't involved. So here's a couple of tips on what that might look like. Have each person explain their perspective while the other person listens, and be really strong about that. Explain up front, I'm going to ask each of you to tell us how you feel without being interrupted. And I don't want the second person to spend time arguing with everything the first person said. I want them to explain what's important to them, what their perspective is, irrelevant of what the other person said. At the end of that, we've got two understandings, two positions, and you can confirm. So did you sort of hear this, and did you get that, and I can see this. Out of that, I would suggest the three of you create a list of issues together so you can guide that. So what do we think, having heard both persons' perspectives, what do we think the key issues here are here? And make a bit of a list of them. There might be 3 or 4. Try not to end up with 20. Try and categorize them into sort of 3 or 4 main topics, and then explore each of them one at a time. And try and talk. This is to avoid us just going off on tangents all the time. And we're keeping it non-personal. We're keeping it factual. But it might still be uncomfortable, and that's okay. If someone says you really upset me, if someone says I didn't like that, that's not personal. What we're avoiding is personal attacks. And as we explore each of the issues one at a time, we're looking for solutions. And as you come up with solutions, maybe jot them down. And at the end of the whole process, you can run through those solutions and ask is everyone comfortable to live with this? Of course, at the same time, there's an obligation for people to get on appropriately in the workplace and to reach a solution that works for the team. So if the solution is, we just won't talk to each other, not okay. This might take a series of discussions with reflection in between. That's fine. In fact, it can often be the time in between that allows things to settle, that takes the emotions out of things, but also that helps people gain some insight. As you're facilitating this discussion, remember, agreeing with and liking each other is optional. At the end of it, they may not agree with each other. I'm not going to force that. People will have different perspectives. They don't even have to like each other. Communicating professionally, not optional. I expect you to communicate properly in the workplace. We're paying you to come to work to do your job, and you can't do that without communicating professionally. And the other non-optional part of this is ensuring the issues don't impact their performance and spill over to team morale. Just because they've got a problem doesn't mean other team members should suffer. So I'll support you in solving it, but I do expect you to come up with a workable solution that's not just about your egos, and obviously I don't say that, but not just about egos, but is about being professional and continuing to work together at a high level. What they do beyond that, up to them. So let's move to phase 4, which is the final one and doesn't take very long to talk about. This is when we escalate. Escalating might be you imposing a solution. Escalating might be you bringing people and culture into the discussion. Escalating might be you employing a professional mediator. The escalating could be your manager getting involved. And we do that when it can't be resolved. So you've done your 3 steps, the observe, the coach, the mediate, and things are still entrenched. or when it's impacting performance and team morale. You might also escalate and you might go straight to step 4 when there are potential legal, workplace health and safety, or other safety issues. So, for example, in the case of bullying and a claim of bullying, I would suggest that at least talking to people and culture before you pursue any other steps. If there's some other safety issue, emotional, psychological safety, if someone's not in the right place to deal with this sort of stuff. So don't be trigger happy on escalation, but there are times where there are certain drivers that mean you should at least get outside advice and potentially outside assistance. I'm going to wrap up there. It would mean so much to us if you've enjoyed this, if you would take 30 seconds to scan that code and leave a review. Stars are wonderful. A short sentence telling people what you think of these is great. It helps people find us and follow us, and that helps us keep creating content. All the best until the next episode.